Shalom. Shalom. Giving honor and praise to the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. My name is Yeshiah Israel, of the tribe of Dan of the nation of Israel. This particular teaching is not going to be a short one. However, it will be a necessary one. What I mean by such is the fact that we want to, on this channel, Moreh Yeshiah history lesson, and giving honor and praise unto the Most High, speak upon this particular subject of history. This is a teaching in history, and only those who are into history will understand. The theme of this is to show the history of the Israelites as it relates to the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and going to the Romans, then to the Americans. Some pictures are provided in this thesis. Shalom. I can be reached at kashubhut@gmail.com. KASHUBHUT@gmail.com. Next slide. From the era of Assyria's rise to the era of America's rise, a short breakdown. We were besieged several strong times. Some of the nations were the Canaanites, Philistines, Assyrians, Babylonians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Ethiopians, Egyptians, Moabites, Edomites, and the Americans. Now, I want to emphasize on certain things. In this particular presentation, we will highlight and speak upon the aspect of the Assyrians, Babylonians, the Greeks, Romans, and the Americans. Now, in another teaching on this, I actually went into the aspect of the Arab invasions that happened. Now, when you hear a brother speak about the aspect of the Egyptians and the Ethiopians, the Moabites and the Edomites that were besieging the Israelites, that was more so, you may say, in the biblical era, all right? Because you had Shishak of Egypt, all right, that attacked the Israelites. Many people associate Shishak with Shishak of dynasty 22 of ancient Egypt. Many people do. They knew had the aspect of the Ethiopians under King Zerah of Ethiopia that attacked the people of Judah when you read about the situation with King Asa of Judah. So when I speak upon that, that's what I'm talking about. Also in the book of Nehemiah, it speaks about other nations that came up against the Israelites, such as the Arabs, all right? Or Ishmael, more particular. The siege made on the northern tribes of Israel was for 3 years. The capital was Samaria. Prior to that time of that, Hazael of the Arameans attacked the tribes of Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh. The Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III attacked Israel in 734 BCE, in which the tribe of Naphtali was taken captive. 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 29. The successor of Tiglath-Pileser was Shalmaneser V, who ruled from 727 to 722 BCE. The siege he began was completed by his successor Sargon II. This being in the year 721 BCE. The successor after Sargon was spoken of. Now, this right here, brothers and sisters, I just wanted to highlight. When I said the successor of Sargon, all right, was a guy named Sennacherib. And in other presentations, I spoke about that particular guy in the aspect with Sennacherib and Hezekiah of Judah. Next slide. Hung in Assyria and America. Now, what you're looking at on the left-hand side is people of the ancient Assyrians inside of Sennacherib's war, where they actually were impaling the Israelites of the tribe of Judah. That's what you're seeing on the left-hand side. What you're seeing on the right-hand side is a black man, all right, that is hung in the United States of America. So this is just something we just wanted to point out for edification purposes. Next slide. Assyria and Babylon discussed. The Assyrians, even before this era, had a, quote, time with the Israelites. Yehu, king of Israel, paid tribute to Shalmaneser III. Jehoash, king of Judah, paid tribute to Hazael, king of Syria. Jehoiahaz, king of Israel, paid tribute to Adad-Nirari of Assyria. They paid tribute to avoid being besieged. We today pay rent to avoid the marshals from coming. The Assyrian king Esarhaddon actually recorded besieging Manasseh, king of Judah. The Assyrians as a kingdom after that went into civil war and anarchy. And by the 7th century BCE, that is to say 600 something BCE, the Babylonians were coming up as a power. The Babylonian king named Nabopolassar defeated Ashurbanipal and ruled over the land of Assyria. His son Nebuchadnezzar is noted for taking captive of the tribes of the southern part of Israel, that is to say Levi, Benjamin, Simeon, and Judah. In the year 597 BCE and in the year 586 BCE, Judea, kingdom of Judah that is, was taken as captive. The kings being Jehoiah, king, and Zedekiah. According to Bernard Anderson in his book called Understanding the Old Testament, we see this. Egypt came to be one of the major centers for the Jewish dispersion. Now we understand the Jewish is being the Israelites. So this is something we just want to speak upon for edification purposes. Why did I mention the aspect of Bernard Anderson's book entitled Understanding the Old Testament? Because if Egypt, since the era of the southern kingdom of Judah, became a major place where the Israelites was going for secure, all right, that stands to reason that the Israelites in many cases did not go to Europe on their own volition. They were going to African places on their own volition. All right. The Elephantine Papyrus document 1 is dated to the time of Darius II, Nothos. It speaks of the temple of Yahu in Elephantine, Egypt, which was in what is now called southern Egypt. This is dated to the 5th century BCE. Now, the Elephantine Papyrus we went over in another teaching called External Sources of Israel and Hebrew History, which I can sit there and put inside the description of this, all right? So this is something we want to talk about for edification purposes. Next slide. Yehu and the Assyrian king. Now, this was shown in other aspects, but I just want to show it, brothers and sisters, right here, all right, where it speaks about Yehu, king of Israel, bowing down to Shalmaneser III. That's to say the king of Assyria in the 9th century BCE. All right, so the Assyrians did not hide the fact of them oppressing the Israelites. All right, as we see here, and as we see here on the left-hand side. All right, next slide. Esarhaddon in Cush and Judah. Now, Esarhaddon, all right, was the king of Assyria, brothers and sisters, that ruled when the Egyptians were being subjugated themselves by the Assyrians. All right, you had an Egyptian pharaoh that was actually literally an Ethiopian or a Cushite by the name of Tahaka. All right, he's pronounced his name as Tirhaka inside the Bible. He's written about in 2 Kings chapter 19. All right, now that correlates, brothers and sisters, with the time, all right, of Hezekiah, king of Judah. The successor of Hezekiah was Manasseh. Manasseh is written about inside of the prism that I actually went over in the past. I just wanted to show how all of the world history connected to the aspect of what happened with the Israelites. Next slide. The matter of Assyria summed up. To understand some of the history presented in context, let us understand that Tiglath-Pileser was known as Pulu in Babylon, and his successor, Shalmaneser III, was known as Ululai in Babylon. Now, you can look this up on your own and find out that Pulu in Babylon is the same as Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria, and Ululai of Babylon is the same as Shalmaneser V of Assyria. So the Assyrians, brothers and sisters, during this era was ruling and having hegemony over the Babylonians as well. So this is something we want to go over for edification purposes. All right. Pulu defeated Naburadazari of Babylon, that is. The Assyrians too were defeated by the Chaldeans, the Beit Yakin, when they joined forces with the Persians. All right, so this is talking about aspects of different nations coming to war against each other. Sargon of Assyria actually defeated Merodach Baladan and ruled in his stead. You read about Merodach Baladan, brothers and sisters, inside the book of Jeremiah. All right. After Sargon died in 705 BCE, the Babylonian ruler Merodach Baladan ruled again in Babylon. Sennacherib defeated the united forces of Babylon and Elam. Now, Sennacherib is the king that we spoke about, that actually spoke about Hezekiah, king of Judah. All right, so these are just things we want to point out for edification purposes. Next slide. All right, Judah and Assyria. What you're looking at right here, brothers and sisters, is an image of people of Judah paying homage to the Assyrians. Note, brothers and sisters, the bearded aspect and the afros. The bearded aspect and the afros. That is how even the image of the people of Judah are shown inside the Assyrian walls. Next slide. Empires of Assyria and Babylon. What you're looking at here on the left-hand side is when the Assyrians came to their zenith or their ultimate height and power. All right? Their actual capital was like over in here. All right, but they ruled in Babylon, they ruled in Egypt, and they ruled over where the children of Israel was at. Now, the era of the Bible that it talks about this, brothers and sisters, takes you into the book of Isaiah. And this is why it's important to understand what was going on in Isaiah chapter 7 between Ahaz, the king of Judah, and that is to say, Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Assyria. All right, I spoke about that in my book that is entitled Old Testament Israelites Respond to Messianic Israelites. All right, we're going to go on to the next part over here with Babylon. Babylon, brothers and sisters, this empire right here took over to a great extent where the ancient Assyrians actually were ruling. All right, so when the Babylonians defeated, all right, the ancient people of Assyria, you had it to where the Egyptians in history, all right, this being in the 7th century BCE, tried to come up out of Egypt. The Pharaoh that we're talking about is Pharaoh Necho II. And in order for him to get to where the Babylonians and the Assyrians were fighting, he had to by default go through where the tribe of Judah was. And this is what the book of Kings and Chronicles, that is, talks about when Josiah went up against Pharaoh Necho and was defeated. All right, so this is something, brothers and sisters, that we want to get into for edification purposes. All right. Next slide. Aspect of the Babylonian Empire. Babylon was then ruled by Bel-Ibni, who, with Mushezib Marduk, rebelled against Assyria. Sennacherib, however, defeated them. Sennacherib set up Ashur Nadish Shumi, pardon me, mispronunciation perhaps, as ruler of Babylon. Sennacherib was killed by his sons. Esarhaddon was a ruler in both Assyria and Babylon, but he, in time, set up his son, Ashurbanipal, as ruler in Assyria, and Shamash-Shumukin as king in Babylon. Shamash-Shumukin and Ashurbanipal both had war, and Ashurbanipal won against the united army of Shamash-Shumukin and the Elamites. Ashurbanipal died in 627 BCE, and the Babylonians set up Nabopolassar on the throne. Nineveh was attacked in 612 BCE. That is to say, that is to say, during the kings of Josiah of Judah. Babylon was coming up as an empire at this time. And Sinsharishukun was killed in battle. Nebuchadnezzar defeated Necho in battle. Necho was king over Egypt. Babylon also defeated the people of Tyre. In time, Babylon lost to the Persians. So what I wanted to just go over, brothers and sisters, in this particular aspect is just the different political things that was going on in the lands of the east. All right, and this is a map of what we're talking about. All of the stuff you just read happened all in this vicinity right here. All right, so this is documented once it comes down for edification purposes. Next slide. Persians discussed. In 550 BCE, Cyrus II defeated Astyages of the Medes and annexed them. This is why by the time they came in contact with the Israelites, we see the term Medes and Persians, like in the book of Ezra, Daniel, Esther, and so forth. Eventually, after Cyrus, his son Cambyses took over Babylon and Egypt. The 27th dynasty of Egypt is Cambyses. Darius the first, Xerxes the first, Artaxerxes the first, and Darius the second. So what am I pointing out, brothers and sisters, is that this land here, the land of Egypt, brothers and sisters, during Dynasty 27 of Egypt, all right, is when the people of Persia was ruling in Egypt. Now, earlier I spoke about Necho, who assassinated Josiah of Judah. Necho we're speaking about was Dynasty 26. Inside of my book, Egypt Talk and Writing, I spoke about the aspect, brothers and sisters, that Dynasty 26 was the last great black independent dynasty that ancient Egypt had. Not that the Persians were not black, because they were, but it wasn't an independent Egyptian thing. All right, so this is just saying we want to point out for edification purposes. In 538 BCE, the Persian king Cyrus II defeated Nabonidus of Babylon, thereby annexing Babylon. The people of Judah, Benjamin, and a lot of Levites were permitted to go back to the land. That's to say their homeland. And this is when you now get to the book of Ezra and so forth. The unity of the Medes and the Persians is called the Achaemenid dynasty. The Persians also defeated Lydia. The people of Lydia, brothers and sisters, is is west of the main lands that we were just talking about. So let me show back, brothers and sisters, where Lydia will be right over in this vicinity right here. All right, so I just want to show that for edification purposes. Now, when you go in the book of Daniel, chapter 7, verse 5, and it says that the beast had 3 ribs in its mouth. Those 3 ribs represented Egypt, Lydia, and Babylon, because that's who was ruling when the Persians, or that's who was ruling prior to the Persians overtaking them. The defeat of the people of Lydia by the Persians is actually recorded by the historian Herodotus. All right, so let's go on to the next part in this part here. The Persians also defeated Lydia. Under the Persian king Xerxes I, Athens, which is in Greece, is burned. In that era, Persia won battles in Thrace and Macedonia under Darius I. The Greeks did eventually rid themselves of the Persians in battle, after battle, such as in the case of Simon against the Persians in the 5th century BCE. So this is something, brothers and sisters, when you can look up these names and you begin to see how all these different kingdoms, nations, and empires conquered each other, dwelt with each other, traded with each other. But in most cases, when it came down to the aspect of a new kingdom coming up, it was through war. All right, next slide. The matter with Persia continued. The Persians also in 343 BCE reconquered Egypt, and thus is Dynasty 31. The rulers being Artaxerxes III, Arses, and Darius III. In the time of 333 BCE, there was the Battle of Issus with Greece, and the Battle of Gaugamela, which was both a loss to Persia. All right, so the Battle of Isis or Issus, all right, was in 333. And the battle that you read of Gaugamela was in 331 BCE. All right, and so this is something that we want to point out, brothers and sisters, for edification purposes. So you can begin to see how Babylon came up as a kingdom and their relation with the Israelites after the Assyrians was a kingdom and their relation with the Israelites. Then you had Persia after Babylon, and then Greece that came up after Babylon as an empire. So, pardon me, with Greece that came up after Persia as an empire. So these are just things, brothers and sisters, going over history for edification purposes we want to go over. I want to take time out now for those who might be wondering what the title is about. When I say in honor of my mother, These are the kind of things me and my mother, may she rest in peace. These are the kind of things me and my mother would talk about. History, 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 language, history, and so forth and so on in her later days. You understand? So this is why I'm saying I'm giving this an honor to her. May she rest in peace. All right. The second part of this says, in regards to the Israelites, certain things must be made known about them in the Medo-Persian Empire. The Israelites during that time were not free. Nehemiah, who was appointed governor of that area, was just that, an appointed governor. In Nehemiah chapter 2, we see that he had to get permission in order to go to the land of Jerusalem. There are some who teach that since Shealtiel and Zerubbabel were both prophesied and were in the time of the Persian rule, that the Israelites were free, but such is not the case. The tribes of Israel were not wholly there together, and there were Israelites outside of the land. Some say more out than in. So there are some who actually say that there was more Israelites outside of the land of Israel than there were Israelites inside of the land, which would lead credence to the aspect of Israel being scattered. Next slide. The Persian Empire. Now, what you're looking at here on the left, the Persian Achaemenid Empire. All right. You see where they ruled Egypt, Dynasty 27. The Bible relates that the ancient Persians had rule over where the Israelites was at. All right. And so this right here, brothers and sisters, is just something we want to point out, all right, in regard for edification purposes. Brothers and sisters, now when you look at this right here, the ancient Persian aspect is their home was in Iran of today. All right. And so they were ruling in that particular regard. When you look at the images of the Persians in the temple of Susa, they are blacker than myself. All right. So Darius the First, and what is referred to as the Behistine inscription, speaks of the events from the 6th to the 5th century BCE that occurred in his society in what we call Iran today. So you may want to look up the Behistine inscription of Darius the First. All right. So these are things we are pointing out. These are things like footnotes, if you will. That way one can go and study for their own timing. Now we're looking at a similar image, brothers and sisters, on the aspect Persian Empire. This is where they ruled. All right. 538 to 331 BCE. All right. We're talking an interval of over 200 years. And in it, archaeologists actually speak about they built some of the greatest things that the world has yet to been able to duplicate. We're not only talking about the pyramids of Egypt, all right, which the Persians seem to have not contributed to, but what we're talking about is the actual architecture that they were into. All right. Persia was about building. All right. Greece was about conquering. It was against Persian rule. Did you know to sit there and have a slave? And the definition of slave that we see of today, like a chattel slave or something, they had, if you want to use the terminology, servants. You understand? Peasants, if you will, satraps, if you will. But an out and out slave, even if the Persians did have it, it was against their law. Next slide. Greeks discussed. The next people to attack the Israelites were the Greeks. After the death of Alexander, there were four rulers. They were Cassander, Seleucus, Ptolemy, and Antigonus. Alexander died in 323 BCE, and in the year 301 BCE, the War of Ipsus had occurred, and that caused Antigonus, who they called Antigonus the One-Eyed, removed and replaced with Lysimachus as ruler of Babylon. So let's understand what's going on, brothers and sisters. All right. Babylon, as we already know, as you can see here, is already over here. Greece is all the way over here. So when Alexander defeated Darius III, actually Darius III was actually assassinated by his own people. All right. Alexander caused him to quote unquote be on the run. All right. So what wound up happening was when Darius was assassinated, Alexander wound up becoming ruler of such said area. All right. The two of the four generals after Alexander most important to the Israelites is Ptolemy and Seleucus. Next slide, please. The Ptolemy and Seleucid empires. Ptolemaic Empire, as you see there with Crete, pardon me, not Crete, Crete is over here. I'm sorry about that. What you see over here in the Greek islands, pardon me, all right, and all over here too. That's where the Ptolemaic Empire was. And as you see here, that's also where the children of Israel were, all right? And Ptolemaic, the Ptolemies were having their own dynasty. Dynasty 32 of ancient Egypt, all right, is the Ptolemaic dynasty. So, and not trying to be funny, Dynasty 32 of ancient Egypt was ruled by the white man. All right, now, when you look at, brothers and sisters, this particular aspect here, you have Nabatea. Nabatea comes from the people of Nebaioth. Nebaioth, brothers and sisters, all right, was the first people that come out of the line of Ishmael. All right, so that's something we just wanted to sit there and emphasize, brothers and sisters, and point out for edification purposes. What you're looking at over here, brothers and sisters, is the Seleucid Empire. Now, remember, earlier we said the two of the four generals after Alexander most important to the Israelites is Ptolemy and Seleucus. So when we see the Seleucid Empire, brothers and sisters, it's something we should sit there and take note to for edification purposes, for understanding reasoning. Now, when you look, brothers and sisters, at the aspect of the Ptolemy people, you had Ptolemy the first, Ptolemy the second, Ptolemy the third, Ptolemy the fourth, Ptolemy the fifth. Now, Ptolemy the fifth of ancient Egypt is when you get the aspect of what they call the Rosetta Stone, which Napoleon found much later on, all right, in the last 200-300 years. Ptolemy the sixth, all right. During the era of Ptolemy VI, Rome defeated Perseus, thus making ruler of Corinth in 168 BCE. Then you had Ptolemy VII. The Israelites during the era of Ptolemy VII was in battle with the Seleucids. All right. Then you had Ptolemy VIII. Then you had Ptolemy IX, Ptolemy X, Ptolemy XI, Ptolemy XII. All right. Now, during the era of Ptolemy XII is when Rome actually is in power and takes control over Judea. Ptolemy XIII, all right, he ruled with who is referred to as one of the biggest whores in history, as Cleopatra VII. All right. Now, it is generally taught that Ptolemy XIII had Pompey assassinated. Pompey is the one that Tacitus, the Roman historian, spoke about going inside of the Israelite temple. All right. Then you had Ptolemy XIV. All right. And during his time is when Julius Caesar was assassinated. Julius Caesar and the Edomites made a league with each other. And we'll get into that as we get into this presentation right here. All right. Then you had Ptolemy XV. All right. Now, after the era of that, you get to when Rome has annexed Egypt to the Roman lands, or that's to say to the Roman rule. All right. Now, in that particular aspect, brothers and sisters, that's when you get to the era of Mark Antony. That's when you get to the era of what happened with Augustus. That's when you get to the era of what happened with Herod. And later on, you will see how that connected with the house of Israel as far as history is concerning. All right. So these are just things we want to show for edification purposes. All right. It says Antiochus III, Seleucid Empire 197. So the Seleucids, as you can see right here, when the aspect of the Seleucid king defeating Ptolemy V. What happened is Seleucus III, all right, defeated Ptolemy V in the Battle of Panion. All right. And so what wound up happening is when that happened in 198 BCE, the Seleucids wound up controlling where the Israelites was at, as you see there. And the Ptolemies had to stay further in, closer into the continent to Africa. All right, so this is just something, brothers and sisters, we want to point out in that particular regard. Next slide. Greece and Rome discussed. Antiochus III, a Seleucid, captured Jerusalem in 198 BCE. The time before that, Jerusalem was held under the hegemony of the Ptolemies. Antiochus IV captured Jerusalem in 168 BCE. The Maccabean revolt was from 168 to 142 BCE. To give an account of the Maccabees, let us do this. The purpose, as stated, giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. When we go over these kind of subjects and teachings, I try to do them at a certain time when I'm figuring that people are not in school, when I figure people are not still at work. You understand? And then I try to share it with who I think will be caring about this kind of subject inside of Messenger on Facebook or so forth and so on. All right. So this right here, once more time, is presented for edification purposes. All right. Judah Maccabee was leader from 165 to 160 BCE. In the time of his leadership, the issue of Bet Zur occurred. This war led to the institution of Hanukkah. Now, the Bet Zur battle, brothers and sisters, is written of in the book of First Maccabees, chapter 4. This war, okay, Jonathan Maccabee was leader from 160 to 142 BCE. During this time, the Greeks lost 2 wars to Rome, and Rome won 1 war, the Punic War III. Simon Maccabee was leader from 142 to 134 BCE. During this time, Rome was on the scene and Greece was out the bracket. After Simon passed, his son John Hyrcanus was leader. This is the same Hyrcanus who was noted in Josephus for making the Edomites convert to the ways of being Hebrew/Israelites. He was leader from 134 to 104 BCE. During his time is when the war of Jugurtha in North Africa occurred in 105 BCE. Also, in that same era, Carthage was rebuilt by Rome in 129 BCE. So what do we want to point out in part, brothers and sisters, is this. The Punic War ended, all right, during the time of Jonathan Maccabeus in 146 when the army of the Carthaginians lost to the Romans. Scipio Africanus is the one who defeated Hannibal in that particular regard. All right. Hannibal, in his own way, may he rest in peace, attempted to go and attack the Romans, which was leading then to the Second Punic War. Hannibal never made it to Rome, but he gave the Romans a beat down that the white man Rome, not being racial, still remembers. So this is something, brothers and sisters, that we want to point out for edification purposes. The point in this, in part, brothers and sisters, is to sit there and show how the history is intertwined and how the history all connects one with another. How the history all connects again one with another. All right? So, I wanted to go into another secular part, if we will. All right? Brothers and sisters, and that's this. This is the book of Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, book 12. And it says, from the death of Alexander the Great to the death of Judas Maccabeus. All right, in chapter 2, it says this. How Ptolemy Philadelphus, that's to say Ptolemy II, procured the laws of the Jews to be translated into the Greek tongue and set many captives free and dedicated many gifts to God. When Alexander had reigned 12 years, and after him Ptolemy Soter 40 years, Philadelphus then took the kingdom of Egypt and held it 40 years within one. He procured the law to be interpreted and set free those that will come from Jerusalem into Egypt and were in slavery there, who were 820,000. So when you read here in the book of Josephus, it says that Ptolemy II was saying that he released the Israelites that was held in captivity, that his predecessor Ptolemy I, quote unquote Ptolemy Soda, brought out of the land of Israel into the land of Egypt in ships. That gets into another subject about Egypt and ships when we get into this subject right here. It goes on to say concerning this, but he said he would be informed that there were many books of laws concerning the Jews, that's to say the Israelites, worthy of inquiry after, and worthy of the king's library, but which, being written in characters and in dialect of their own, will cause no small pains in getting them translated into the Greek tongue. Why am I going over this in the book of Josephus? Is because some people want to sit there and say that Hebrew is Greek. Where they're getting that understanding from, I don't know. Because one of the oldest records speaking about the Hebrews and the Greeks in the book of Josephus, it says it will cause no small pain for the Hebrew to be translated into Greek. That's why when they had what we're going to get into the Septuagint, correct me if I'm wrong, they did not have a Greek form for the Yod Hey Waw Hey. So Greeks refer to it in many cases as tetragrammaton, which simply means the four letters. But the Hebrew, Yod Hey Waw Hey, he who was, he who will be, Hayah Yahweh, said by many as Yahweh, said by some as Yahweh, said by some as Yahweh. That's a whole other subject. You understand? Once it comes down to the pronunciation of the holy name, But one of the things to point out in this particular case, brothers and sisters, is that there is no Greek transliteration for the Yod Hey Waw Hey, because Greek doesn't hold the thought, correct me if I'm wrong, of one who is in the past and the present and the future at the same time, like the Hebrews had a concept of. All right, so let's go on. That the character in which they were written seems to be like that to which is the proper character of the Syrians, and that its sound, when pronounced, is like to theirs also, and that this sound appears to be peculiar to themselves. So the pronunciation of certain things was peculiar, meaning special to their own selves. And it says that it is similar, brothers and sisters, to read this again. We are in the book of Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, book 12, chapter 2, where it says that the character in which they are written, that is to say, the aspect of its penmanship, seems to be like that which is the proper character of the Syrians. Syrians, brothers and sisters, all right, in the book of Josephus will tell you that the Syrians were the Arameans. The people of Aram, all right, brothers and sisters, were the children of Shem too. The mothers of the Israelites were Aramean women. So Syria is the Greek transliteration of the word Aram. So ancient Syria is the same as the ancient Aramean. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes, connecting the dots in many cases when you're dealing in history, linguistics, and so forth and so on. All right. So now, when you're going back, brothers and sisters, into this particular aspect here, right? I made the point already about the language. Okay, next slide. Greek and Roman Empire. Now, what you're looking at on the left-hand side, it says Greek era, right? What you're looking at on the right-hand side is the Roman Empire at its height. Done conquered Spain, Northern Africa, and the great part that you see over here. According to a guy named Bunsen, Bunson, he wrote a book called The Encyclopedia of the Roman Empire. And he stated that the terminology in the name Africa was applied to the area that you see right over here. All right. And that was in the area where Utica was, where the people of Carthage in that vicinity. And of course, as we know from historians, that the terminology Africa is not applied to that whole place outside of the aspect of colonialism. Let's go on to the next slide. Romans discussed. The sons of John Hyrcanus were Judah Aristobulus, who was leader from 401 to 103 BCE, and Alexander Jannaeus, who was leader from 1 03 through 76 BCE. A lady, yes, a woman, was a ruler too in the era after Jannaeus from 76 to 67 BCE. Her name was Salome Alexandra. The children of Salome and Alexander, that is to say her husband, were Aristobulus, who was ruler from 67 to 63 BCE. And then John Hyrcanus II from 63 to 40 BCE. By this time, Rome is heavy on the scene, and in 63 BCE, Rome makes Jerusalem a Roman province. Pompey was assassinated, but no one missed him, to be candid. Tacitus records that Pompey was the first Roman to enter the Jerusalem temple, but noted that the Israelites in there had no images set up. The Hasmoneans in the era of Pompey had Hyrcanus as their leader, but he was a war to Antipater. Antipater is the father of Herod, all right? The Maccabean independence was from 143 to 63 BCE, and Pompey died in 48 BCE. Next slide. Pompey and the Herod matter. In a time when Pompey was not in Jerusalem, we see Crassus in the temple, and he stole from the temple. Crassus died in 53 BCE. When Crassus died, the Israelites struck for freedom. This was put down by Longinus. He sold 30,000 Israelites into slavery. Antipater, Pompey's buddy, died in 43 BCE. When Antipater died, Parthia set up Antigonus as king. He was the last Hasmonean king. Antigonus was killed by Mark Antony. Mark Antony was defeated by Octavian. Antony committed suicide eventually. So I want to point out something, brothers and sisters, about what they try to say in kingdoms and kings and being killed and who took over and said contradictions. Antigonus was killed by Mark Antony. Check. Mark Antony was defeated by Octavian. Antony, that's to say, Mark Antony committed suicide eventually. Brothers and sisters, being defeated and being killed are two different things. Just like in the book of 2 Samuel, where it says that the Philistines smote Saul. They did defeat him, but Saul actually committed suicide when you go to 1 Samuel chapter 30. So now it's hard to figure out in that particular regard. Herod, son of Antipater, became friends with Augustus. Herod defeated the Parthians of Rome, and Rome set him up as a leader. Next slide. The Edom situation in history of Israel. It says this where it's underlined. To Eliashib, the word of the king is coming for you, for your people. Behold, I have sent to warn you today. Ramat Negeb has to be defended, lest Edom should come there. Least Edom should come there. Eliashib is one of the people that was ruling in the area of southern Judah. Now, Idumea that you see right here on the right-hand side is Edom. Idumea is the Greek formation of the word for Edom. So the Israelites, all right, ever since this era that you read of right here, where it speaks about the era of Jeremiah, the era of Lachish, and so forth and so on, always was talking about Edom coming in. Edom, all right, which was actually over here in times past, all right, always wanted to get up into the land of Israel. And this is why the book of Obadiah, let's read that in part. The book of Obadiah, we're going to read, it's only one chapter, but we're not going to read the whole chapter. We're just going to read a couple of verses out of it. All right. The book of Obadiah, chapter 1, because there's only one chapter. And we're going to go, brothers and sisters, to verse 10. All right, of that same chapter. The book of Obadiah, chapter 1, verse 10. For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. In the day that thou stoodest on the other side, in the day that strangers carried away captive his forces and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou wast as one of them. But thou shouldst not have looked on the day of thy brother, in the day that he became a stranger. Neither shouldest thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. Neither shouldest thou have spoken proudly in the day of distress. Thou shouldest not have entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Yea, thou shouldest not have looked on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor have laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. Neither shouldest thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those of his that did escape. Neither shouldest thou have delivered up those of his that did remain in the day of distress. So, what is Obadiah talking about, the day of distress? It is talking about, brothers and sisters, this right here. Let's go to Jeremiah, all right, for edification purposes. Jeremiah chapter 1, if we will. We are in the book of the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 1, and it says this in verse 4. Then the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Before I formed thee in the womb, I knew thee. And before thou camest out of the womb, I sanctified thee. And I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. Let's go on in verse 11. I wanted to read that part so we can see Jeremiah's prophetic call. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Jeremiah, what seest thou? And I said, I see a rod of an almond tree. Then said the Lord unto me, Thou hast well seen, for I will hasten my word to perform it. And the word of the Lord came unto me the second time, saying, What seest thou? And I said, I see a seething pot, and the face thereof is toward the north. Pay attention. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 14. Then the Lord said unto me, Out of the north, an evil shall break forth upon all the inhabitants of the land. For lo, I will call all the families of the kingdoms of the north, saith Yah, and they shall come, and they shall set everyone his throne at the entering of the gates of Jerusalem, and against all the walls thereof round about, and against all the cities of Judah. And I will utter my judgments against them, touching all their wickedness, who have forsaken me, and burnt incense unto other gods, like Baal, and worship the work of their own hands, like their idols. You see, so now in Jeremiah chapter 1, we see, brothers and sisters, that the Babylonians were already becoming a power. If you see that Jeremiah began to prophesy in the time of Josiah, Josiah was during the time when Egypt was in their 26th dynasty. All right, this is why you read about Necho in Jeremiah chapter 46. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. So when we go into this other source right here, note that it says Obadiah right there. Then it says to Eliashib, the word of the king is incumbent on you for your people. Behold, I have sent to warn you today. Ramat Negeb has to be defended, lest Edom should come there. And here we see Edom right over here in the mix. They wanted the land of Israel, as it says in Obadiah, neither should as you have put your hands on Jacob's substance. What is the substance of Jacob? Torah, menorah, the writings that the ancient Israelites had. Brothers and sisters, did you know when the so-called phylacteries were found, it is understood that their elders was held at gunpoint so that way they can sit there and give them the Ge'ez and Amharic records that they had of ancient Israel? I want to emphasize that again. It is generally understood that when the so-called phylacteries that's in Gondar, Ethiopia, when they were, before they was airlifted or so in Operation Moses in 84, and Operation Solomon in 91, they was held at gunpoint and made to give up many of their records in the Amharic language, which is connected to Hebrew, and in the Ge'ez language about their travels and how they got to Ethiopia in the first place. So the violence against thy brother Jacob, it says, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. So these are the kinds of things, giving honor and praise to the Most High for the kind of mother I had. These are the kinds of things me and Garrett Nifla I used to talk about. No filter. You understand? So coming out of an Israelite orientated household as a child, I was reared and taught into this by my teachers. You understand? So I can put in the description the list of my teachers, all right, that I hold for respect purposes. All right. Now, let's go on to the next part. The Herodian line, genealogy of important Herodians. All right. Antipater, Antipater the second. Then you see Herod. Herod, the guy that we're going to be talking about a little bit, is the one who became friends with Octavian. After he was friends with Mark Antony. See, Mark Antony and Herod, the son of Antipater, were friends. When Mark Antony got defeated by Octavian, aka Augustus, the first Roman emperor, right? Herod had to jump ship. What am I saying about Esau? That's how they move. This is why when you get into Obadiah, it says, they that were at peace with thee have laid a snare against thee. They were at peace with thee. Esau's spirit is always trying to sit there. I'm going to be the middleman. I'm going to sit there and just make myself just feel welcomed, knowing good and well that you had an ulterior motive all along. All right? Now, from Herod, all right, you get all of this aspect right here. You get Herod, another one of Herod, all right? Because there were different Herods. We want that to be pointed out, all right? And all of this leading down to Agrippa. That becomes important because Agrippa of Esau, we're going to show in a second. All right? Herod, he sought a tie with Rome and status. In his life, he made sure of the Hebrew culture was cut off and that Greece came into place. We discussed previously that the Greek nude images is what turned some Israelites off from the ways of Herod. Herod died in 4 AD, and his son Archelaus was given the area that Judah was by Augustus. It should be noted that the place called the Sanhedrin was at first dominated by Israelites during the era of the Seleucids in 200 BCE. But by the time Herod and Archelaus came on the scene, it was run by the Edomian and Roman people. This is why the doctrine, let's pay attention, of the Talmud is curved toward not making too strict ways about the Torah being observed. What do I mean by that? Anybody who can sit there and say, well, the law that says a parent brings their stubborn and rebellious son to be stoned was never practiced in ancient days. For you to even try to sit there and find whether or not that was practiced or not shows that you ain't even trying to sit there and keep the Torah yourself, because you're trying to find out what they didn't do. So you won't have to sit there and think that you have to do. See, that's the spirit of Esau. That's how Esau moves. You understand? They play games once it comes down to the Torah. You're not supposed to, brothers and sisters, be having sex on the Shabbat. We discussed that in another video that I could put in the description here about teaching on Wy'yaqhel Pequudai. All right? So this is just something we want to point out in that particular regard. Now, let's look. Herod matter part 2. Edom, Antipater, plus Julius Caesar, friends. Edom, Herod, plus Julius Caesar, friends. Edom, Herod, plus Augustus, friends. The Romans, you will find out later on, betrayed Esau. So why then would the book of the Dead Sea Scrolls say that the Romans were the Edomites? Is this. While the Romans and the Edomites were in cahoots and friends with each other, they came against the house of Israel. So of course, in the Israelite writing, Esau being the brother of the Israelites, you're going to talk more about your brother than the foreigner, because they would have expected, brothers and sisters, the Romans to be against them. But why are you against me? You're my brother. That's the situation what that is. So when it says in Obadiah, neither shouldst you have gazed upon the day of your brother's affliction, neither shouldst thou have cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou, Esau, Edom, Esau is Edom, is Idumea, you were as one of them. So when the Romans came up against the house of Israel, Esau, you was as one of them. You're not linearly the Edomites, pardon me, linearly the Romans, but the Edomites were classified as Romans, even as the Edomites would have been classified as enemy of the Israelites, because Esau joined on with the enemy of the Israelites. This is for edification purposes, brothers and sisters. Next slide. Rome and the Israelites continue. After the era of Augustus, we see Tiberius. After Tiberius, we see Caligula. Both Caligula and Claudius were friends with the grandson of Herod, Agrippa II. Now, remember when I was speaking about the aspect of that being important with Agrippa? This is why. All right. It should be noted that the Israelites during this time were under the subjugation of the Roman. When I say the Roman, in other words, the Roman people, the Roman Empire, the Roman himself, all right? Just like you say, the American man, the Roman man, all right? Tacitus points out that Roman Emperor Caligula wanted his image in the temple. Tacitus, that is the Roman emperor that pointed out that Caligula wanted his image in the temple. The Israelites refused. They said Tacitus was willing to fight instead. During the era of Caligula, then Claudius, we see that the Israelites in part formed what is called the Sicarii or the zealots. Now, I want to point out something about Caligula. This is a man who had sex with his horse. This is a man who raped men. This is a man who was happy, brothers and sisters, to sit there and see people's head being levied from his or her body, if you will. All right? The Roman emperors could be what Daniel saw when he saw the fourth beast thing in Rome, because who would have ever thought that a leader would make a horse his priest? Because that's what Caligula did. You had a Roman emperor by the name later on of Elagabalus. He cut off his scrotum. So that way, pardon me, when his quote unquote, his man, quote unquote, anally penetrates him, you'll have easier access without the scrotum getting in the quote unquote in the way. That's what the Romans were into. These were the oppressors of the Israelites. Buchanan, one of the presidents of the United States, is rumored to have been penetrating the men who were his slaves anally and raping them. The Romans would have had no problem with that either. Remember, you find the aspect when you read the Willie Lynch letter. Willie Lynch said Rome will envy us. So if you already know what the Romans were into, can you only imagine what our immediate ancestors went through with this European man? Because they were fags back then too. And just like in prison, they will sit there and make you them. Excuse me, I'm not going to use profanity. There are people, even in the prison system, that will sit there and say, I'm not going to do you, you're going to do me. That's what they're talking about in that particular regard. What do you think Samson feared? What do you think Saul feared? What do you think Zedekiah of Israel, all of them, Samson, Saul, and Zedekiah, what do you think they was worried about when they said they're going to come make sport with me? These dudes were homos. You understand? So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes, brothers and sisters. All right? So getting into this particular aspect right here, right? During the time of Caligula, then Claudius, we see that the Israelites in part formed what is called the Sicarii or the Zealots, right? They were willing to kill Israelites who were willing to conform to Rome. In the time of Nero, there was a Roman procurator named Florus. He stole money from the temple, and the Israelites revolted on account of such. The Israelites also during this time fought among themselves while being oppressed by the Romans. Sounds like black people in America, huh? And they eventually lost. Hence, brothers and sisters, when you're going against your own while you're under oppression, you have no wins. You understand? But many of our people, afraid of being racist, will sit there and say, look, Marsa, I hate niggas too. And that was some of the mindset of the Israelites back then. Next slide. The army of Florus crucified Israelites. Sold Israelites into slavery. The Israelites too participated in slaying one another. And in 68 AD, they killed 12,000 of their own people. In the 1930s, black people were lynched in the United States by white mobs. In the 1990s, blacks were killing blacks in street gangs such did as the Bloods and the Crips. You get the point? So while you have it, so when the Romans was oppressing the Israelites, you had the Israelites that was oppressing one another. And during that same time, you had what would be, in today's terminology, like the Black Panthers, that's to say the zealots or the Sicarii of that day and time, trying to sit there and maintain some kind of order and respect. You understand? So that right there is something we want to point out, brothers and sisters, for edification purposes. All right? Nobody gets praised for going against their own. When you have a civil war, you don't get love for such. You only come out the loser at the end of the day. Israel, pay attention. Black man and black woman, pay attention. Because we're going to show something later on about the modern black man and the modern black woman that's going to make us think that we need to unite more. And if you don't think so, I need you to unsubscribe from my channel after this. Because if you can sit there and see what we're going to get into and you still okay with not uniting with your own, I don't need your views. Keep your energy somewhere else. Shalom. All right? Let's go on to the next slide. Rome and the Israelites continue. Nero committed suicide. Vespasian, the next Roman leader, now comes to the scene, and the Edomite leader, Agrippa II, is accompanying him. Vespasian went in time to Rome, and his son Titus laid siege to the Jerusalem. That's to say the Jerusalem temple is what I'm saying. M. Grant, that's to say Michael Grant, in his book, The History of Ancient Israel, states the following. After urging surrender in vain, Titus pressed on with the siege. He succeeded in capturing the temple, which was totally consumed by flames. Elsewhere in Jerusalem, however, the Jewish resistance groups, that's the Israelites, although weakened by famine, continued to hold out, while Titus's soldiers were permitted to plunder, massacre, and burn. Finally, after a defense that had lasted for 4.5 months, every part of the city had fallen. As in other parts of Judea, huge numbers of prisoners were taken, destined for execution or starvation or slaughter in gladiatorial shows. The gladiator shows, in many cases, were the Israelites, brothers and sisters, that was shown being killed by animals. So that's how Israelites, to a certain extent, started to get into the Roman Empire. All right, being presented there as clowns and to be put to death. Anyone able to claim a connection to the house of David was also hunted down and eliminated. Now, looking at it in that particular regard, and it's not to get sidetracked, one has to wonder, why is it that the said Jewish man of today doesn't seem to want to go against the Romans? Because they're always seeming to want to go against those who oppress their people and who harm their people or who disrespected their people or so forth and so on. So why is it then that it seems they never want to go against brothers and sisters, the aspect of the Romans? I have an answer. It's because when Rome defeated the Israelites, that gave the later on the Khazars the okay politically to sit there and get up into the land of Israel. See? Not too hard to figure that out and put two to two together on that. It's like you might say today's terminology, follow the money. Who benefits? And if you're not going into what they call the tomb or the rock or whatever, or they're not going into certain archaeological aspects, perhaps you're going to find out that the true Judeans were people of color. Because that's what happened in the 1930s. As stated before, Gert Miller, I put it out in another video, stated that the people of Lachish that was found unearthed inside the skulls were of the Negroid type. Lachish is mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 34. So could the people of Judea in the time of Jeremiah be of the Negroid type? And if such is the case, how then does the European Khazarian Jews fit in? So what they'll do is they'll deny that the Khazars ever converted to Judaism. This is what they'll do. They'll deny history itself. just to try to fit in their religion, not to fit in their lineage, not to fit in their culture, just to sit there and fit in their religion. That's why the New York Times in the 1980s was asking Jewish rabbis, who are these black people in Ethiopia saying they come from the house of Judah and Dan, and said that their lineage goes back to King Solomon? Who are these guys not speaking English, but had got translators saying that they come from the line of Solomon? Jewish people had no answer for that. So you can tell who controls the media, because to a great extent, the New York Post, the New York Daily News was not really covering that aspect that you see the New York Times covering in the 1980s. All right? Something we want to point out for edification purposes. Follow the money. Who benefits? That kind of thing. Next slide. Vespasian and the Titus matter. What you're looking at here is Vespasian, and here you see Judea captive, a captive of Judea. The Judah people being held as captive. All right? And here we see the Arch of Titus. That's to say, when they carried the things out of the temple and brought them over to, many Israelites say, the Vatican. But we know one thing, they brought the Israelites to Rome, so why not sit there and bring their articles as well? So when you find people saying, we don't see nothing of the Israelites inside of museums, you might want to go over to Vatican City and see if you can get in and see the catacombs and see how the two houses of Israel look. So you can begin to see the altar, the menorah, and the trumpets that they took out of Jerusalem. Because they show it in the picture right here, what they took out of Jerusalem. The Romans, Domitian of Rome, that is to say, Titus's brother, actually made this thing called the Arch of Titus in the year 81 AD. So they're memorializing brothers and sisters taking the artifacts of ancient Israel. So you're not going to find it, brothers and sisters, in the Metropolitan Museum. Perhaps no more than this picture. You may have to go to see where they brought it to. Next slide. The diaspora in part. History shows us that Titus died in 81 AD and Domitian died in 96 AD. It is understood that Domitian was assassinated. Both Domitian and Nerva banned circumcision. Hadrian, the successor of Trajan, made war against the Israelites, and in the year 132, and it ended in 135 AD when the Israelites lost in the Battle of Bar Kokhba. The Israelites were not allowed to go back to their land of their ancestors, and they were pushed further into northern Africa. There was rebellions in Cyrene, which is in Libya, against the Roman persecution. Some historians state that the Israelites during that time, from Titus to Hadrian, migrated to Europe on their own accord. However, such is not the case. Now, there's a guy named Alfred Butler. No, pardon me, I had the wrong name. I'm gonna get the name and then put it inside the description. All right, it wasn't Alfred Butler, but there's a guy who promotes Christianity, right? And he wrote a book called The Black Man in the Old Testament. Now, don't be fooled by the name, because I was fooled by the name. Wow, the black man in the Old Testament. Then when you go into the book, not realizing that the man is a proponent for Christianity, he says that today we only see the white descendants of the children of Israel. Hold on a second. You're saying apparently that the black man in the Old Testament, the Israelites being a majority of the men in the Old Testament, were black. But because you're now saying that they were going into France and other European places, that they were bleached out, did this guy know about the aspect of the Elephantine Island? Because he mentioned in the same book about Zephaniah, chapter 3, which we're going to get into later, about beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, So how in one breath is the author speaking about Israelites beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, and then you're going to say that today we only see the white descendants of the Israelites? How is Louis Farrakhan saying that the children of Israel are white? Because Islam and Christianity is ran by the Jewish men who are whites. That's how. There is a video of Louis Farrakhan saying that the children of Israel are white. There is a book by Christian people saying that today we only see the white descendants of ancient Israel because both Islam and Christianity acquiesce and enter to their great white father, the Jewish man. That's why. You understand? This is why you find people who are converted to Islam have an issue with Israelites. When do they ever, quote unquote, have a problem or issue with the Jewish man? That's something I want to sit there and point out for edification purposes. Because the Nation of Islam wrote the book, The Secret Relation Between Blacks and Jews, but you don't, no offense intended, in that publication, explain that the blacks are the real Jews. But rather, you're seeing that the Jews involved in the slave trade, citing European Jewish people's encyclopedias. Good source. However, maybe you might have wanted to sit there and explain that the children of Israel are later on referred to as Yehuda of the Romans, which Tacitus said these people, the Jews, look as if they came out of Ethiopia. Ethiopia, at the end, ops burnt faith, blacks. So when you find a person who wrote the book called Black Man in the Old Testament, and then you find somebody like Louis Farrakhan saying that the children of Israel are white. Yes, he did say it. He said they were black too, but there's another video of him saying that the children of Israel are white. So you can tell who pays who. As we said earlier, follow the money train. Who benefits? You understand? Some historians state that the Israelites during the time from Titus to Hadrian migrated to Europe on their own accord. However, such is not the case. In the Apocrypha, we see, this is from 2 Maccabees chapter 1. The brethren, the Jews that be in Jerusalem and in the land of Judea, wish unto the brethren, the Jews that are throughout Egypt, health and peace. Throughout Egypt, not England. Throughout Egypt, not England. Next slide. This shows that the Israelites were during the Roman Empire scattered in Egypt and throughout Judea. The Israelites of their own accord did not go to European places. Since the days of Solomon, king of Israel, Israel has been going to African places, that's to say parts in Africa. The Bible in 1 Kings tells us that Solomon married a daughter of Pharaoh. This, of course, was a marriage of peace relations between the kingdoms. Some state that the gold Solomon had is now in what we call Zimbabwe. Why then would a people who are used to going to African places on their own accord turn around and go to European places? The Roman, that's to say the Roman people, came from the north and attacked the Israelites. It would be illogical for the Israelites to go north on their own volition, seeing the enemy was coming from the north. Let's look, brothers and sisters. All right, taking it back all the way over here to this map here on this side. See, Rome is in Italy. The Romans came by sea and many over by land. The Israelites being over here, we are looking at the right-hand side. Would it not make more sense if an enemy whose army is bigger and stronger than your own army to go south, to run and retreat, if you will? You're not going to retreat over here into Europe because that's where the enemy is coming from. You're going to retreat down into places like here because you're used to going in here because you already have a record of Joseph years before that being in there. So it's not too hard to figure out what we're talking about. All right. Next slide. Israelites and Romans, then French. The Israelites during the time of the Romans migrated south to Egypt, south of Egypt to Ethiopia, and west of Ethiopia to West Africa. To this day, there are Israelites in Ethiopia, Ghana, Nigeria, Mauritania, and Liberia. I want you to pay attention to Liberia. Please remember this. Please remember this aspect of Liberia. The Israelites adopted names for themselves such as Ashanti, Igbo, Mandinka, and Fulani. Maurice Abadi, French historian, asserts that the Semitic origin of the Fulani of the Niger cannot be questioned. He believes Jews from North Africa also joined their brethren many years later in the 2nd century AD to found the Empire of Ghana. There are others that say this holds credence since there are Fulani found in Senegal and the Cameroons. Remember Senegal, remember Fulani, and remember, please, brothers and sisters, the aspect of Liberia. Liberia becomes very important when we get into this kind of aspect about the history of the house of Israel. All right? Now, according to Louis Rappaport in his book entitled Last of the Ethiopian Philosophers, he stated that the Sembonian River, according to the Philosophers, is placed in America. As we already went over this kind of teaching in from Avaris to Alabama, part 1, which can be put inside the description here. If the people in Africa, I'm talking about the so-called Philosophers in this particular one, if they felt that all the Jews, all right, in the world were black, then how are they accepting the white Jew? I tell you how. Imperialism. The elders don't accept them, didn't accept them, and remained in the golden dark aspect in Ethiopia. Those who went over and were airlifted over to Israel are not the happiest. It's not time of the nation's rule to be over, as it says in the time of Abraham. It says the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet filled. So there's just a certain amount of time before Israel is truly to have to be able to go back up into their land. All right? Next slide. Let's go. Israelites in Africa. The book, Lost Tribes of Myth by Dr. Alan Garvey, Duke University. They sell his book for over $1,000 on Amazon. You look on Amazon and find, or look for the book, Lost Tribes of Myth, brothers and sisters, he's saying it's a myth because the lost tribes are not lost. The tribes are not lost. So the concept of the lost tribes is a myth. That's what the author is saying. All right? By Dr. Alan Garvey, Duke University. Duke University is in North Carolina. All right? He says Judean Hebrews from Upper Senegal, West Africa. See what we were talking about? To this day, there are Israelites in Ethiopia, Ghana, Nigeria, Mauritania, and Liberia. All right? Senegal, we want to point out, is where the Wolof, W-O-L-O-F, people are. All right? This is a depiction of the Judean Hebrews saying this. These men are the descendants of the ancient Judean nation. Their ancestors fled from Jerusalem before the arrival of the Roman armies, which were under the command of Vespasian and General Titus. All right? This is what we want to point out for edification purposes. Brothers and sisters, this book was written in 1930. All right? That book was written 88 years ago. 88 years ago, you already had scholars speaking about this kind of subject. So where was the said conscious community then? Saying there was no nation called Israel. Well, all your people, all your Google Hangouts, that didn't exist back then when this kind of information is being presented in 1930. So you can tell who studies, who cares, who just want to not study, not care, so forth. What you're looking at here is the festival that we say in English as Passover, said in Hebrew as Pesach, and said in Amharic as Pasika. All right? This is unleavened bread that's made, and these are two females of the Beta Yisrael, the so-called Falashas. All right? That's why I said Israelites in Africa. This being west, this being east. Same continent. Next slide. Israel's diaspora discussed. In 1528, Rabbi, Abraham ben Eleazar Halevi reported that the tribes of Dan and Gad were living in Ethiopia. In 1542, Rabbi Moses Basola of Ankonda went on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. When he arrived in Beirut, he met 4 Jews from Babylonia. One named Moses stated to Basola he heard of Arabs who had seen it with their own eyes, that there was indeed such a thing as the Sabbatean River, and that the, quote, sons of Moses inhabited it without a doubt. J. Rogers stated that West Africa has black Jews also. We see that Oluda Equiano stated the following. Oluda Equiano and Igbo stressed the similarities between the Old Testament Jews and those of his own people. Like the Israelites in their primitive state, our government was conducted by our chiefs and judges, our wise men and elders, and the head of the family with us enjoying a similar authority over his household with that which is ascribed to Abraham and the other patriarchs. Why do you think they didn't want us to read in slavery? The law of retaliation obtained almost universally with us as with them, and even their religion appeared to have shed upon us a ray of its glory. For we had our circumcision, we had our sacrifices and burnt offerings, our washes and purifications, and on the same occasions as they, the Jews, did. This is from Oluda Equiano. All right. They were not saying that they came from Waset in ancient Egypt. As a matter of fact, the God people that live in Togo tell you that they come from the land of Israel. Look them up. God, G-A, that's the name of a tribe. Where do the God people in Togo, West Africa come from? They will tell you the land of Israel. All right? Not too hard to figure out what we're talking about for edification purposes. All right? We had our circumcision. Christianity does not promote circumcision. We had our sacrifices and burnt offerings. Christianity says there are no sacrifices anymore. Our washes and purifications. And on the same occasions as they, the Israelites, or as it says there, the Jews did. So when a man ejaculated, he washes himself. When a woman gets off her menstrual cycle, she washes herself. That's practiced in many of the cases. That's what we're talking about when it says about the aspect and on the same occasions as they did. There was rituals. It wasn't haphazard of the culture. Next slide. Did you know that there are people who say that the Torah is the only culture that promotes washing as much as it does? Did you know that the ancient Spaniards of Spain used to brush their teeth with their urine during the time of the Romans? Did you know that the royalty in ancient Europe, brothers and sisters, washed up like once a year, 3 times a year, something like that? So when her uncleanness, that's to say her menstrual cycle came along, don't believe these people on YouTube talking about women just began to do it now because of diet. No, menstrual goes all the way back. The Bible talks about it. Ancient Chinese people talk about it. So let's deal with understanding. All right. So looking at it, brothers and sisters, in this particular case, can't deny that kind of history. Next slide. Reference. There was abundant information concerning the Israelites being scattered into African places, and the only reasons with the understanding the Israelites being in Europe was by force and not by chance. Now, this next part here gets into the aspect of Hebrewisms of West Africa and the Arabs with Muhammad forcing people 1,600 warriors and marched against the Jews' stronghold at Khaybar. We went over this in another presentation this week on this channel. Next slide. John Alderby and the Israelites. The Israelites were noted as being part of the people who dispersed throughout Africa Citing Joseph Williams again in Hebrewisms of West Africa, we see John Oldeby state many Jews are scattered over this region. Stop! Stop! Brothers and sisters, the book that Hebrewisms of West Africa is talking about is written back, brothers and sisters, all right, in the 17th century, 1670s. This guy that you can see in the picture right here, he was a translator among the Europeans, right? John Oldeby. He stated what many Jews are scattered over this region. Some natives boasting themselves of Abraham's seed, inhabiting both sides of the river Niger. Not the rivers in Europe, but the Niger. It's saying that the Jews were on both sides of the Niger, saying that they are from the children of Israel. This is what we're talking about for edification purposes. Others are Asian strangers who fled there either from the desolation of Jerusalem by Vespasian. You notice how Europeans in their own histories don't deny that they whooped Judah's behind in 70 AD? And in the situation when Judah was committing suicide in the war with the situation with Masada and what happened with the aspect with who they refer to as Rabbi Akiba in ancient history with the Bar Kokhba battle, they don't deny that history. The Israelites don't deny that history. The Assyrians don't deny beating up Israel, and the Israelites don't deny catching a beat up down by the Assyrians. So the Israelites, excuse me, not using any profanity, speaking about getting their butt beat, all right, we can trust the Israelite record pretty keenly. Because what nation tells their granddaughters, baby, we lost, baby, we got slaughtered, unless you just have to sit there and acquiesce to the truth of a matter. No nation does that and makes a confession of losing. They either don't talk about the war like the ancient Egyptians did, or they embellish the situation like the ancient Egyptians did. You understand? So this is something we want to go over for edification purposes. Now, this dude that you see right here, John Oldeby, stated again, all right? Some natives boasting themselves of Abraham's seed, inhabiting both sides of the river Niger. Others are Asian strangers who fled there either from the desolation of Jerusalem by Vespasian or from Judea wasted and depopulated by the Romans, Persians, Saracens, and Christians, or else such as came out of Europe whence they were banished, etc. Where they were banished in the aspect of being taken by Titus and company. What happened to the people, brothers and sisters, that Titus took in 71 AD as captives? Because they're going to want them to procreate. So could it be that the people that Titus took as an aspect of saying, look, these are my prisoners, this is a sign that I took over Jerusalem? What happened to their descendants? Those were some of those people, perhaps then that John Oldeby is talking about when he said that they were banished. Because eventually, they knowing that the rest of their brothers and sisters scattered into Africa is going to try to get their ASAP. All right? So this is something you want to talk about for edification purposes. Why do you think even people in New York want to run south where black people live? Why do you think you got black people in New York saying, I can't wait to move to Charlotte. I can't wait to move to Greensboro, where our people are at? You know why? Because even though we know it's still in the land of exile and captivity, our people are still there. So whether they was already under the Romans prior to that, they had no problem after being banished in there going to where other Israelites were at in Western Africa. Next slide. Ethiopia and the matter with Israel. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia shall they bring my suppliance, even the daughter of mine disperses my offering. Me'eber lanah hare kush, atarai ba puzai, yobilun min kati. I want to emphasize this word here, puzai, my dispersed, puzai. You know what that really means when you look at this letter right here with the patak under it, and then you got the yod. All right. Yeah, we're going to continue with the Hebrew classes too. All right. Blessed be the Most High. You know what that is, brothers and sisters, in that particular regard? That's the possessive plural. Puzai, not puzi. Puzi, all right, will mean my dispersed. But puzai means my dispersed ones. So this dispersed here is more than just one part of the dispersion or the diaspora. It's dispersed, it's scattered out. All right. So here we see Abyssinia, Ethiopia, as it was called then, is also called Abyssinia and Ethiopia here in history. And here we see Sudan or Sudan. Now, colonized Sudan is just here, but Sudan was actually all over here at one particular time. Just like at one time, this area here called the Atlantic Ocean of today was called the Ethiopian Sea, as been pointed out in other presentations. So this is something we want to point out in that particular regard. Next slide. From Africa to America discussed. See what we went through: Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, scattered into Africa, and now you get into the aspect from Africa to America. The slave trade in West Africa brought down the great empires that had existed. The slave trade started to go west from West Africa, first to Europe, then to the west, like the Western Hemisphere. The Atlantic slave trade, brothers and sisters, went north before going west. The first slave ship to go west was in 1518. Though there were blacks enslaved in Hispaniola in 1501, showed that black people existed in the Western Hemisphere prior from West Africa as captives. So I always want to make that disclaimer because recently I've been quote unquote going ham, quote unquote going in regards to saying that when people try to say the Atlantic slave trade didn't go west, you're speaking foolishness, which there's another, listen, giving honor and praise to the creator. There's another presentation on that Atlantic slave trade coming up in September. You don't want to miss that live one. You don't, if you got the time. And it's free. All right. In 1591, the Empire of Songhai fell to the Spaniards and the Moors. The Moors we're speaking of are they who were kicked out of Spain by Isabella and Ferdinand in 1492. The Spanish were heavily involved in the slave trade. All right. In 1494, we note the Treaty of Tordesillas, in which Spain and Portugal divided the Western Hemisphere for themselves. The natives were enslaved first, then a two-faced gentleman, we're going to keep the language clean, that is to say, Bartolome las Casas, petitioned to the King of Spain, Charles V, to have the slaves brought from Africa to come west. That is to say, from Western Africa to places we call today Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and Jamaica. Hispaniola is now today more so called Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Now, the other day, I'm in New York, right? And they have what they call the Dominican Day Parade. And I'm looking at the people from the Dominican Republic in the parade with the Dominican flag, speaking Spanish. And I'm saying, you look Trinidadian, but you're speaking Spanish. What is that saying, brothers and sisters? The Dominican Republic, as it's called today, has dozens, and I'm quite certain hundreds of people who are like unto me in complexion or darker. Because the sisters that I saw at the Dominican Day Parade were not trying to be always about color, blacker than me. Them women speaking Spanish in the Dominican Day Parade this past weekend was blacker than myself. And I would have sworn if I didn't hear them speak that, oh, they must be from Jamaica. You understand? We cannot disagree that Israel has been scattered. All right? Next slide. The Songhai and the Oyo. All right. Songhai Empire, 1464 to 1591. The Oyo Empire was from the 14th century to the 19th century. Now, Songhai Empire fell, brothers and sisters, in part to the Moors, as we have discussed. Now, the terminology Moor, M-O-O-R, is a very broad one. Moor, said by Ivan Sertima in his book, African Presence in Early Europe, says that the Moors come from the Latin word mores, which means swarthy or dark or black. According to some, the word Moor means a navigator or one who travels. When you look up the word Moor in Hebrew, it will tell you Menahel Oneya, which means the driver of a ship. So, again, something we want to point out for edification purposes. What you're looking at on the right-hand side is where the kingdom of the Oyo people were. Now, remember earlier I said, remember Liberia, because it becomes important. You'll see why. Next slide. The Kumasi and the Fulani. The Kumasi, brothers and sisters, are a people or a land, all right, that has the people in part that come from the Ashanti, all right, in Ghana. Kumasi, okay, was the principal city in the land of Ghana. Why does that become important, brothers and sisters? Is because, as we read earlier, this. Maurice Abadi, a French historian, asserts that the Semitic origin of the Fulani of the Niger cannot be questioned. Now, remember Fulani that we see right here, right? He believes Jews from North Africa also joined their brethren many years later in the 2nd century AD to found the Empire of Ghana. Now, when we read that right there, and that came from a book called Hebrew Heritage of Black Africa, right? So when we see Ghana in representation right here and the Fulani, it said the Semitic origin of the Fulani of the Niger cannot be questioned. Now the Fulani extend, as stated, from Cameroon, going all the way up by Senegal, and then going all the way far east as the present-day Sudan of today. So it's a very large tribal group of people. All right? Brothers and sisters, these people, especially the sister that you see right here to the far right, don't look that much different than a quote-unquote Black American woman, to be quite candid, once it comes down to that. All right? Next slide. The matter of Dan in West Africa. Dan, an ethno-linguistic grouping of people inhabiting the mountainous west central Côte de l'Ouvert, pardon me if I mispronunciate the French, and adjacent areas of Liberia. Remember I said Liberia is important to remember it? The Dan belonged to the southern branch of Mende linguistic subgroup of the Niger-Congo language family. Now, there are people, even on Facebook, online, if you will, that say that they come from the Congo, and they're namely saying that they come from the Bantu people of such. Now, they teach the people who saying that they're Israelites among the Bantu people, they saying that they come from the tribe of Judah. And I've actually discussed certain things with them. According to them, they have an oral story of them going down into certain parts of Africa. So that's something we want to point out for edification purposes. You might want to check out a site called Bantu Branch of African Hebrews. Bantu Branch of African Hebrews is where you see it on website, the kind of information that the brother is talking about. All right? The Gayo or Dan people is an ethnic group in northeastern Liberia and in Cote, whatever pronunciation that is in French. Pardon me on that one. All right? There are approximately 350,000 members of the group, united by the Dan language, a Mende language. You remember Mende, right? That's the people that Amistad took. Remember Joseph Sinkay and the Amistad? They were from the Mende. All right? Now, when you watch Steven Spielberg, because he knows certain things, in his movie Amistad, and I think people know where I'm going to go, when the women were on a boat singing Yahweh, 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 Yahweh. That's what they were singing, even in the Hollywood movie. We already know they wasn't saying Sekhmet. They wasn't saying Allah. And no offense, they wasn't saying Jesus. Before they was brought over here between their land there in Western Africa, and before they came over here to these Western shores, they were not saying, even in that movie, Jesus, Allah, or Sekhmet. They were saying, as Israelites already pointed out, Yod hey wow hey, Yod hey wow hey. You understand? Spielberg knew what he was doing when he did that because he know who the children of Israel are. You understand? This is not a secret to them. They know this kinds of things. They know these kinds of information. We already done said as Israelites that the Hollywood elite knows what it is. You understand? You don't think even some of the black actors know about this? Think about it. Remember when Mekhi Phifer, who's an actor, he played in Paid in Full as a drug dealer, he played in Othello. Mekhi Phifer was going to play in a movie about Israelites, as well as the other guy, Danny Glover, was going to play in a movie about Israelites. You don't think these elites know this? You don't think Oprah Winfrey knows who the children of Israel are? Obama did a movie called Barry in which they were trying to mock Israelites. They know good and well who the children of Israel are. That's not a secret. You understand? So these are certain things we want to point out as always stating on here for edification purposes. All right? Dan, also called Gaio or Yakuba. Brothers and sisters, Yakuba, Yakob, Jacob. Okay, let's go on. An ethno-linguistic people grouping of people, inhabiting the mountainous west central, that word again in French, and adjacent areas of Liberia. The Dan belong to the southern branch of the Mende linguistic subgroup of the Niger-Congo language family. They originated somewhere to the west or northwest of their present lands. Why do I point that out? Because it says somewhere to the west or northwest of their present lands, meaning that many peoples, even in Western Africa, done traveled from one place to the next. All right, perhaps among the Malinke, or that is to say Mandingo. The Dan are closely related to the Gere, also spelled Ngere or Guawe, to the south. Brothers and sisters, let me ask a question. These tribes that we're talking about, right? Can they be traced by name and ethnic group as such prior to the exodus of the Israelites out the land of Egypt? I'm just throwing that out there, and I want to give the answer that I have at the end of the presentation. Next slide. Dan in West Africa. Now, this is the map of Africa, as you know. All right, and this is the land where so Dan the green where the Dan people are. All right. Can we say that the ancient tribe of Dan of the Israelites carried that name with them when traveling to Western Africa? Because some try to say that Dan became the Danish or the Danes of Europe. No. Mm-mm. According, brothers and sisters, to the guy, Eldad the Danite, he said that the tribe of Dan, to a great extent, right? When Jeroboam became king in the northern tribes of Israel, that many of the tribe of Dan was like, peace, we out. And they didn't want to sit there and deal with the aspect of the northern and southern kingdom of ancient Israel at war. According to Rudolf Windsor in his book Babylon and Timbuktu, he actually cites Eldad the Danite in that particular regard and what he's talking about. You know, many people promoting that Kemet ideology don't want to talk about Eldad the Danites. And Eldad the Danite was in the continent of Africa. How can you possibly not want to deal with that kind of reason or explanation? I'll tell you why. It's not so much that they hate Israelites in the Kemetic thing. It's more so they hate the Most High. Every Saturday is your Sabbath. I ain't doing that. It's overtime. Homegirl look good. I'm going out. And so to sit there and be bounded by laws, that's what the conscious community hates. It ain't the fact of not of that is to say, it's not the fact of being called the chosen people, the children of Israel, the elect of the Most High, the Creator. Who wouldn't want that kind of praise and title? But it's certain things that come along with being the elect of the Most High. Laws, statutes, commandments. I don't want to sit there and do that. So you deal with the ancient tribe of Dan did with their idols. All right. We want to point out that the Dan were known as they who migrated to parts for peace, though they themselves were not always about peace. Now, when you look up in your own time about the Dan people in Western Africa, you will find out that they are heavy into idolatry. But so was the lady who cursed the thief in the book of Judges. And then when her son said, Mother, this is the 1100 shekels, she goes and buys an idol with it. See, the European Jews, they try to come at people such as myself, saying, oh, they were idolaters and worshiping idols. Jeroboam, the Israelite, worshiped the idol. You understand? Not being an idol worshiper is not the mark of being an Israelite. Being an Israelite is a sign of being from the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, your character is different than your ethnic origin. And that's something we want to point out for edification purposes. Your character, your deeds, how you move, how you live, how you act, how you roll is different than who you come from and who you descend and where your pedigree is. Your actions and your pedigree are two different things. You understand? Your deeds and your ancestry are two different things. You can't mix the two. So trying to make the Torah a religion, like Jewish people do, they would say to us, y'all claiming to be the people of the Israelites, but what about what they were doing? They was following the ways of Jeroboam. They was following the ways of Ahab, the wicked Israelite. They was not getting rid of the idols that Omri, king of Israel, set up. Not too hard to figure out why that would be. Next slide. Dan woman in Africa and hair matter. Now, this is a woman, this is pictured from the 1930s, that comes from the Dan people. And it says this: there are a vast variety of traditional African styles, ranging from complex curves and spirals to the strictly linear composition of this 1939 Dan style from somebody gonna have to tell me that word in the description or call me and let me know how to correctly pronounce that because I just can't get it. Sorry. The date of this photo, 1939. So if you look at the hairstyle right here, sprouting out and braids, with the black woman today going on the quest of going natural, it ain't too hard to figure out what we're dealing with and what we're talking about. Next slide. Remember this picture for later, all right? Like I asked you to remember Liberia, I'm asking you to remember this picture. Next slide. The Portuguese and the Spaniards. Goncalves, 1441, brought slaves to Portugal. He worked for Henry the Navigator. When Cristobal Colombre, aka Christopher Columbus, set sail in 1492, there were 1,000 blacks sent to Europe yearly. In 1513, there were 30 blacks as slaves with Balboa. You know, the one who they said discovered the Pacific. In 1519, there were 300 blacks as slaves when Cortez went to conquer Mexico. When Pizarro was killed in 1541, it was his black slaves who carried his body. It is thought in 1538, some say 1525, that the first blacks were brought to Brazil. To what is called the United States, there were blacks brought as slaves by Lucas Ayllón in 1526. There were blacks as slaves in 1565 in what is now called St. Augustine, Florida. Florida was operated by the Spanish until 1819, and then in 1845 it became a state. Florida was not part of the colonies. The colonies ended in 1776. So I want to point that out just for American history purposes. Next slide. The Spanish and the English. The Spanish brought blacks as slaves to what is now called Jamaica in the 16th century. The British attempted to involve themselves in the Asiento situation. As known, John Hawkins participated in training blacks as slaves in places such as Venezuela and Mexico. John Hawkins, it should be noted, did not come to what is commonly called the United States of America, nor did Columbus. America received its name from a German map maker named Martin Westermuller. The Spaniards brought blacks as slaves to Jamaica early in the 16th century. The slave trade was rife in the middle of the 17th century. The English, Spanish, Dutch, Portuguese, French, Danes, and Irish all had a hand in the enslavement of our people. The English controlled Jamaica, the Bahamas, Antigua, St. Kitts, Barbuda, Nevis, Montserrat, they still control Montserrat, Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Barbados, Trinidad, first controlled by the Spanish, Tobago, the Virgin Islands, Tortola. The French controlled Guadeloupe and Martinique. The Spanish controlled Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Santo Domingo. The Dutch controlled St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix, now called America's Caribbean. All right. The captive markets in South America were not closed. The Portuguese controlled Brazil. The Spanish controlled Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Chile, and Argentina. The English controlled Guyana. The Dutch controlled Suriname. In Central America, the Spanish controlled Mexico, Panama, and Honduras. The French controlled Canada until they lost it in 1763, in which France gave Canada to Britain. France controlled the Midwest portion of what became the United States until the era of Thomas Jefferson, when Napoleon sold it to the United States. The Spanish controlled Texas, Florida, California, Nevada, and New Mexico. French and English West Indies. All right. This right here, the map I meant to put on the other side. The British West Indies, as you see here, and then the French West Indies, as you see over here, such as Guadeloupe, Martinique, and so forth and so on. All right. So I just want that to be shown. This is the part right here. All right. Next slide. The blacks in the West are from. Most of the blacks captured and brought to the Western Hemisphere come from the Igbo, Ewe, Bayafada, Bakongo, Wolof, Bambara, Serer, Ibibio, and Arada peoples. Other highly advanced tribes, such as the Mandinka, Ashanti, Fulani, and Dahomey, rarely fell into Europeans' hands. Next slide. Remember I asked you to remember the Wolof earlier? Here's a picture of them. 1 and 2. Now, next slide. The Bambara and blacks from LA. Now remember right here when we read about the Bambara? Now please tell me, this being a picture of them painted, what is the difference in hairstyle and features between this and this group here? Do you know who these guys here on the right are? The rap group back from the 1990s called the South Central Cartel, SCC as they call themselves. South Central Cartel that spoke a lot of violence in their music, you know, and so forth and so on. All right? But the Bambara people were not immune to violence either. When you study about the history of Western Africa, you understand? The difference is more so on defense as opposed to offense. All right? One of the things that South Central Cartel, which was a rap group as stated back then, tried to do is while they were talking about what goes on in the hood, they're not condoning it. They're not sanctioning it. You know? And that's what I have to say in regards to that. They resemble to me, I'm sorry. South Central Cartel in the picture on the left. Bambara woman. Here we see one right here and one right here. Lighter, darker. And they didn't sit there and look at each other in the evil eye. You're dark skinned, you light skinned. You know? So, tell me something. While I got silent, I wanted you to look at this picture. You might notice I'm talking a bit slower because I want this kind of information to set in. I was asked, can I show pictures of African women looking like African American women? Easily, right here. The lady that you see there on the left-hand side, and I'm not trying to be sentimental, resembles my ex. That's why the picture stood out to me. She resembles my ex. My ex I'm talking about is not to blow up her name, is a sister that I used to court with that lives in New York, that actually lives in Harlem. You understand? She resembles her. So that's what jumped out to me. And I was like, oh, this is the Bambara. Oh, okay, let me use this in the slide. So that's what happened with that. Now I'm talking about the one over here with the peak rat. Next slide. The forts and the shits. There were forts built such as Axum, Elmina, both controlled by Dutch. The Anna Mabo and Cape Coast Castle controlled by the English, as well as Carmartine, which was ran by the English first, then by the Dutch. The most famous being Accra, where the Dutch, English, and Danos were in close distance. According to Daniel Mannix in his book Black Cargoes, he states concerning Alexander Falcon Bridge, some wet and blowing weather, having occasion of portholes to be shut and the grating to be covered, fluxes and fevers among the Negroes ensued. The deck, that is the floor of their rooms, was so covered with the blood and mucus which had proceeded from them in consequence of the flux that it resembled a slaughterhouse. He was what you call the doctor on the slave ship. All right? That's dated, brothers and sisters, to the 1700s. Again, more evidence of the slave trade. Next slide. This is a replica, or I just say the actual picture of the Elmina Castle. I've spoken with people who said that they've been in there, where they talk about and they do tours and say this is where the people were kept before they were put in the boat, before they was taken to the main boat. You understand? So the information is right there. You can read it for yourself. Elmina Castle was erected by the Portuguese in 1482 as Seu Jorge de Mina, St. George of the Mine Castle, also known simply as Mina or Pretoria da Mina, in present-day Elmina, Ghana, formerly the Gold Coast. It was the first trading post built on the Gulf of Guinea, so is to the oldest European building in existence south of the Sahara. First established as a trade settlement, the castle later became one of the most important stops on the route of the Atlantic slave trade. So just have that to be read for edification purposes. Next slide. More info on this in the description. What you're reading right here, brothers and sisters, in the 15th century, the slave trade went into effect. In the 16th century, it continued such as in the case of Archduke Charles granting monopoly, having blacks sold as slaves in what is now Florida in 1517. We already went over the aspect of John Hawkins, all right? In the 17th century, we noted that the slave trade was rife. That's to say widespread, rife, all right? In 1621, the Dutch had blacks as slaves in Brazil. Why does that become important? Because the Dutch were the people who were the middlemen in regards to the slavery that our people experienced. All right? So, next slide. Remember earlier we read here about New Spain? Well, this was how New Spain looked. All right? The aspect of the yellow, all of that is Spain, property, if you will. All right? Next slide. Presidents, oppressors, and Israelites. There were several presidents of the United States who had slaves. Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Jackson, Buren, Harrison, Tyler, Polk, Taylor, Johnson, and Grant. You know Grant, who was fighting for the North in the Civil War? Prior to that, he was a slave owner. It should be interesting to note that when Gabriel Prosser did his rebellion in 1800 in Virginia, the people who were at the trial in 1801 were told that he felt they, the slaves, were the Israelites of the Bible. James Monroe was the governor of Virginia at that time, and Jefferson was the president. Needless to point out, Prosser was executed. School named after oppressors. Andrew Jackson, junior high school and high school. Jefferson College in Mississippi. Jefferson Community College in New York. Jefferson High School in Oregon. Madison University in Virginia. Madison High School, New York and Oregon. Washington College, Maryland. So all of these schools, high school, college, and junior high school even, all right, all made by the oppressors. Doesn't mean that you don't go in there and learn something, because obviously they didn't want us in college for a reason. So there's nothing wrong with learning something. You know? So let's go on. Lincoln. It should be interesting to note that the President Lincoln fired Fremont due to freeing the slaves in Missouri. Lincoln also fired McClellan for freeing slaves in the states of South Carolina and Georgia. So the said so-called liberator, Abraham Lincoln, was a two-faced individual. All right? Next slide. Abraham Lincoln, wife and son. That's his wife. The picture on the right, that's his son. Lincoln was not black. All right. The black images of Lincoln are made by whites who were trying in his time to say that he was an N-word lover. So they made him as such. They knew good and well that Abraham Lincoln was not black. Look at this picture here. That's his boy on the right-hand side. That man don't look not a near mixed. And he lived well, brothers and sisters, into the 20th century. So just want to point that out. If Abraham Lincoln truly looked like this, he was truly black, right? And not just called black as an insult because he wanted to quote unquote free someone. He had to have been the biggest coon because Mary Lincoln or Mary Todd, who became later on Mary Lincoln, was not a nice person. She was known for calling black people in the public niggers. But we're going to believe that her husband was a black man. No, Lincoln was not a black man. Next slide. Louisiana and the colonies. It should be interesting to note that Louisiana is named after King Louis XIV of France by Cavalier. The same Louis XIV created the slave codes in 1685, which spoke of how much food a slave should get, and if a slave ran away for over a month, that he or she should have their ears cut off and branded. Slaves who hit the slave master or the master's family were executed under the black codes. This is the style of drama that our people had to endure. All right. Louisiana became a state in 1811. It seems as if the United States wants to blame the colonists and the colonists want to blame the Dutch and Spaniards in regards to slavery. Yet, they all benefited from the enslavement of the blacks. All right, next slide. Colonial America and the United States in map. All right, next slide. The dating of the colonies. New York, 1664. New Jersey, 1664. Pennsylvania, 1681. Virginia, 1607. South Carolina, 1663. North Carolina, 1729. Connecticut, 1636. Maryland, 1633. Rhode Island, 1636. Massachusetts, 1630. New Hampshire, 1638. Georgia, 1732. Delaware, 1638. I just want to go over that, and you can see when the actual dating where the colonies, all right? And so when it says became a state, that means it's not a colony no more. It transformed from colonial America to United States of America during the time after the sixth president of America. That's to say, John Quincy Adams. All right, he's the son of John Adams, who was the second president of the United States. So just want to point that out. Next slide. John, Tom, and George, all enslavers. John Winthrop and his deputy governor Thomas Dudley had blacks as slaves in Massachusetts in the 1640s. Governor George Yardley had blacks as slaves in Virginia before 1630, since he died in 1627. May want to look that up. John Winthrop, Thomas Dudley, and George Yardley, because that aspect, a man of Dutch man of war brought us what that is. Look that up. John, Tom, and George, all enslavers. Slavery loved by America. All right. Slavery is the fabric of the American society. It is noted that if slavery ended, the southern United States would collapse. The claim by some that the Irish were enslaved too is true. However, the same nation of people lynched blacks in the dozens in the 1863 riots. So when they try to sit there and befriend you when they're Irish, I'm not saying being disrespectful, but I'm saying be very circumspect. All right. The wife of Abraham Lincoln, Mary, had slaves. There were Native Americans too that had slaves, such as the Cherokee. The understanding of the Seminole fighting on behalf of the blacks is true. However, the last couple of years, the Seminole are very ill toward the black people. That's to say, us of America. All right. Next slide. Some of the notes in Boone Hall. Many times, many speak of the Irish enslavement in the Bahamas as if to make black people shut up concerning the oppression black people went through. To that, I want to state that George McDuffie, the 55th governor of South Carolina, was Irish and he supported the enslavement of black people. See, I looked up the guy, all right? George McDuffie, and then look up his ancestry and it said Irish. So then I looked back later on, found out that he was involved in the slave trade heavily. So the Irish always talking about, or people always talking about, about the Irish oppression? That's between the Irish and the British. You understand? Has nothing to do with me. The Apocrypha says, meddle not in affairs which concern you not. So if it's a matter between them, it has nothing to do with I. So that's what I have to say about that. Next slide. Oh, what you're looking at is the Boone Hall, meaning these were the slave houses that you see right here. All right, this is located in South Carolina. All right, next slide. The appendix, Jews of the Bilad al-Sudan, Baruch chapter 2, verse 30. For I knew that they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people, but in the land of their captivities, they shall remember themselves. Which means that we forgot ourselves in the lands prior to us going into the lands of our captivities. We forgot. We was calling ourselves by the bywords that we went over earlier. You understand? So, but the reclamation or the reclaiming that is of us as the children of Israel is not a light matter. That's why you see it in different parts. All right. Next slide. Where is the land we are speaking of? Israel is in Africa. This land that you see right here, all right, is in Africa, Northern Africa, if you will. So some people say Western Asia. Can't disagree with that either. But let's move on. Israelites and the Assyrians. Remember, I was saying to remember that picture earlier. Let's go back to the Dan matter. All right. See the thing with the Dan and her hair and the cornrows? Now let's see if the Assyrians showed their captives as having cornrows. And as we see here, here the Israelites are pictured as such. And over here with, I consider, correct me if I'm wrong, Afro puffs. So here we see what called cornrows, and here we see Afro puffs, both requiring a comb. Next slide. What is the difference? Now, this goes out to the people who were asking or want to know about and lack of a better term, Africans that look like African Americans. You know who these people are here on the left? These are all females, as you can see, right? And these are all females, as you can see here on the right. The ones from the right side here come from the Western Hemisphere, America. You understand? The ones over here are from Ethiopia from birth. So that's why I'm asking, what is the difference? You understand? They're here out, here straightened, here straightened, here out, here out, here out, straightened, straightened, light brown skin, light brown skin, darker, darker. See, there's no difference. And also, they all look happy. So that's not to be taken lightly either. You know, maybe not her right here, but maybe she has something on her mind. But let's go on. Black woman in America. I wanted to show this image because that's what many sisters are looking for to be looking like. Getting rid of the perms in high numbers to the point where the perm industry is like, we're losing money. How long did you think we were not going to wake up to this? Some kind of consciousness. You remember what we read here in Baruch? It says, but in the land of their captivities, they shall remember themselves. So in remembering ourselves, sisters, in a great extent, is getting rid of what they call the liquid crack out of their head and getting into more of a black, if you will, hairstyle by the droves, especially when they like to put their little bun up. You know, I see a lot of sisters with that. A lot of sisters with that, you know? Black women in Africa. This is from Western Africa. Can you tell me what's the difference? I don't have the picture between this and what would have been the average West Indian inside the field, the cane field, if you will, not necessarily slavery, but what would be the actual big difference? Because when you look at, brothers and sisters, the book Documents of West Indian History by Eric Williams, the woman on the cover look like the woman that you see right here. So again, that's why I pointed that out for edification purposes. Next slide. Black women versus Copts in the East and West. In the land of Israel, all right, we see them dealing with the police, a black woman having to deal with the police in that particular regard. Obviously, neither one seems to be happy. She, for one, is it. And here we see a more graphic one of a woman from Haiti with appears to be like a sword or a knife or so to the guy's neck in protection of her son. So our sisters in the East are dealing with people like Mossad and other Israeli governments and everything like that. And over here in the West, our sisters are dealing with the same thing. So next slide. How the Beta Israel are exploited. They're exploited in this way. I want to pay close attention to this. All of the females you see there are from the so-called Falashas, who call themselves Beta Israel. The three white dudes you see behind them, they're not from the Beta Israel. What were they smiling about? All right, we're going to move on. All right. Then you see here a sister posted against the police there in that particular regard. So that's how we exploit it. How the Beta Israel are exploited. Put them inside the military. This is a sister, a female from the Beta Israel serving inside the Israeli army. And here's a guy from the Beta Israel serving inside the Israeli army. So you got the sisters in their army and the brothers in their army. That's how we are being exploited, brothers and sisters. All right? Next slide. What's the difference? I asked Chief of Chief Naftali earlier if I can use his picture, and he said that I have permission to do so. Now, these are delegates from the Beta Yisrael, the elders. What is the difference between this man in the image? This is in the land of the East, This is in Israel. What is the difference between him and this elder that we see right here? He has on glasses. He has on glasses. He has a pepper beard, black and silver, mostly silver, and so does he. He's looking a certain way. He's looking a certain way. He's a certain complexion, and he's a certain complexion. You know the only difference is the one here to the right. This is one of my teachers. All right, as I stated, I asked permission before I used this picture. He is born in the Western Hemisphere, and the guy you see here is born in the Eastern Hemisphere. These are the elders on the so-called philosophers who call themselves Beta Yisrael. This is an elder that came from the Israelite congregation, Israelitic, as well as Bnei Zakim, for those who know the history when you get down into that particular aspect. So you had the camps in America where this beautiful elder came from. Then you had the bigger organization in the East where these elders come from. So ain't too hard to figure out what we're dealing with and what we're talking about. All right, next slide. 908-587-4841. Contact information. You get this book on Amazon, or you can call me or text me and we can work out how to get that book. I use it through PayPal, or you can sit there and look in the description and there's a link on how to get this book. All right, so I just want to point that out for edification purposes as well. All right. Next slide, and we're going to close out. Bibliography: The Maroons of Jamaica, Slave Trade, A History of the People of the United States, Africans and Their History, Last of the Ethiopian Falashas, The Encyclopedia of the Middle Ages, The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt, The Greatness That Was Babylon. That's a selected bibliography from the books that I cited in this presentation. All right, next slide. A sad matter. Remember earlier I spoke about we're going to go over something about how we as brothers and sisters need to come together, and that if after this you don't think we need to come together, please unsubscribe from the channel, or when my video comes up on your list or whatever, or as a recommendation, please click. I implore you, please click not interested if what we're about to get into does not touch your soul. A sad matter. Due to the recent yet not new cases of police brutality, we wanted to go over a list of some blacks throughout the United States who have been murdered by the police. First, we will deal with the insensitive mean in the next slide, then move on from that point. Next slide. Let's look at this foolishness we see here on the right hand side. We are black. We have 0.0045% chance of being killed by a cop and a 97% chance of being killed by another black. Now, I really wonder who really wrote this, because usually with us, we usually say, as in the presentation, black people or our people or a brother or sister. Usually when white people talk about black people, they usually use the terminology another black. We don't use those terminologies like another black. We usually say black people or brother or sister, all right? Or other terminologies, my peeps, my man, so forth and so on. But to say killed by another black, that's not usually how we talk. We are kneeling to protest the 0.45% is ignoring the 97%. Who is ignoring the 97%? I ask. My cousin was killed by two black men right in Brooklyn. First, he was stabbed, and then when he kept on fighting, he was shot. And then he was killed back in May of 1997. He's buried in the same cemetery that this video is dedicated to my mother. I have a cousin and a mother buried in the same cemetery. She being over the age of 50 when she passed, my cousin not being over the age of 25 when he passed. So when they're saying that we are ignoring, I think you didn't know about the situation with my family and my cousin. The situation in my family with my mother and her nephew. The situation that happened with my cousin's mom. Whoever made this meme didn't know what happened back in May of 1997. So we're not ignoring it. You understand? There are Black organizations in Los Angeles that are trying to reach out to the people about the murders with the Bloods and the Crips. Did you know that in 1996, after Tupac died, may Tupac rest in peace, that the Bloods and Crips killed each other over 20-something times within the span of the same year that Tupac passed away, in anger or retaliation or so forth and so on? So we are not ignoring it, because if we ignored it, we would not know about the murders in Newark back over a little over 10 years ago, when 11 brothers was killed in one weekend. 11 brothers was killed in one weekend. Now, the situation with Chicago, I personally have an understanding that's a similar thing like that movie, The Purge, when the Black people wasn't killing each other enough, so they sent their own to sit there and take out a whole crew of Black people at one time. That's what it appears to be going on in Chicago. Because see, in New York and Brownsville and Brooklyn, all right, while whoever made this foolish meme is saying it's being ignored, did you go to Brownsville and reach out and see the community centers or the community activists out there that were trying to do something? I'm not Muslim. I have snapped on the Islamic religion, but did you know about the Muslims in the pink housing projects in Brooklyn that was standing on top of the roofs? Did you know about the Israelites? I disagree with their ideology, though they are Israel. Did you understand about the Israelites who was following the guy named Hewlett Mitchell, who called themselves YBY, that was saying, excuse me, when the Israelites come through in Miami, the niggas leave? Did you know that? Did you know that the organization of the Israelites that was in the 80s in Miami were having it to where, dude, stop selling this crack and heroin to your people, my mans. We're going to come back in 3 days, and I want to use the part of the language, but I want to speak the way it was. We're going to come back. If we see you selling this crack and heroin to our Black people, we're going to bust your ass. That's what the Israelites was getting at the drug dealers in Miami, to the point when the mayor of Miami made a quote-unquote a Yahweh Day. Now, I don't agree with calling no man the ineffable name of the Most High. Absolutely not. What I am saying, brothers and sisters, and that is this. The Israelites in Miami, it was known, excuse me, when the Israelites came through, the niggas leave. That's what it was. They was ridding in their own way the community of the drug dealers. You understand? Even the mayor of Miami acknowledged that. So when somebody is out there singing in this dumb meme, all right, that we ignore it, I think you need to check your facts. As far as I'm concerned, cracker, because ain't no Black person do this. I can't see a Black person singing a line of being killed by another Black, period. We usually say another Black person or another brother. One of the statements that we had was, a nigga put two in your head before the devil will. That was something I used to hear back in the 1990s. And I have to ask for the language to be excused, but I wanted to verbally state exactly as I heard it, that a nigga will put two in your head before a devil would. Do you understand? So when we see words such as by another Black, nah, we don't talk like that. It says we are kneeling in protest to the 0.45% and ignoring the 97%. Somebody lied in that one when they say we ignoring the 97%. All right? Because we acknowledge that is the case. I know that the people who, and I haven't been in no gun violence, but I'll tell you this, the guys who robbed me were Black. The guys who jumped me were Black. Some of them blacker than me. Some of them Black as the people we saw with the wall of when I got jumped by my own people. Me speaking personally as Yeshiah, the Moreh. You understand? So the point I'm getting to, once it comes down to this kind of matter, once it comes down to this kind of subject, we do acknowledge, fool, that we have a problem as a people. we as Israelites always talk about his eye shall be evil against his brother. So when you're trying to sit up there and say that we don't acknowledge it or we ignore it, somebody made this saying we are phony. If we really had an issue with black people dying, we would focus on 97%. So this is a person who obviously I'm saying is white and is upset because the NFL is not making it like they was. That they're playing the game and they're still taking the knee. That they don't want to sit up there and deal with the national anthem and so forth and so on. Football must have lost a lot. The NFL must have lost a lot. For somebody to say something as insensitive and ignorant as we would focus on 97%. So should we focus full on 97% and not worry about the other part? Should we not focus full on 100%? That's how you know this meme is not made by a black person. Because a black person would say, we need to acknowledge our problem in totality, internal and external. Not this foolishness that we see right here. Who wrote this is the question I ask. The issue is that there are people who are being put to death. So to try to mix a career or a profession with that of a negative self-hating mind is not right. One would expect a negative black person to murder his or her own people. But since when did a race ever be compared to the deeds to them in a career? What am I saying? About the police department is a career, it's a job, it's a profession, depends on what terminology you want to use. The police department don't represent a race, they represent an organization. Black people don't represent an organization. Black people represent a race. So you can't not mix the deeds, the actions, and the situations between a professional career job of anybody with a race or a national origin of another people. Because they're all black cops. As a matter of fact, a black cop is the first one who took the shot at Sean Bell. Mark Cooper, correct me if I'm wrong, that was the guy who first shot at Sean Bell in the car before the Arab or whatever Oliver was, where he jumped on top of the car and kept on shooting and so forth and so on. Reloaded, if you will, at that. You understand? I think his name was Michael Oliver. He kept shooting at the car with Sean Bell, reloaded, which means that he had to pause for a second and then reload again and kept on shooting. Because those cops, regardless of their race, in many cases, they know they're representing their enemy when they're going against them. The black cop in Baltimore who recently resigned after punching a brother in the face and knocking him on the ground and all that, they see us as their enemy, regardless of the race of the cop in over 97% of the cases. You understand? So if emphasizing this, the meme is stupid and it makes no sense on the strength that you cannot mix what is a career, such as the police department, to the deeds of a race of people, because most white people who were killed are killed by white people. We read about the Romans earlier. You understand? We read about Pizarro earlier, who was picked up by his own slaves, black slaves at that. You understand? Pizarro was killed by his own crew. Spaniards killed Pizarro. Who do you think killed Julius Caesar when you get the aspect E tu Brutus, you too, Brutus? Romans killed Julius Caesar. Most people who are put to death are put to death by their own people, regardless of the race. You understand? So this is something we want to point out in that particular regard. Who killed Alexander's father, Philip? It was the Persians who paid a Greek to do it. It was the Persians who hired a Greek to kill Alexander's father. Most people who are killed by their own people is the point I'm bringing out, including black people. So you cannot mix, brothers and sisters. One more time. A career, a job, or a profession inside of a society with the deeds of the race of a society. of a people of a said society. You can't do that because the police don't represent a race. But you know what this is? If I'm correct about a white man or woman making this meme right here, is that the white people know that the police are their army. They know that the police are their protection. So anytime something happens between the police and black people, you're always going to find white people on Facebook in the comments taking the side of the police because they're not going to go against their army. When they talk about to protect the have from the have-nots, it's the black people who they're talking about being made sure that they're being protected from. Protect the haves. The haves are the whites, the have-nots are considered to be the blacks. Why do you think, as Spike Lee pointed out in that movie, Jungle Fever, when the black men and women was slapboxing or fighting in the street, who do you think they was going to come at? The black men. They was protecting the have from the have-nots. You understand? So somebody saying something as ignorant at the end of it as saying we would focus on 97% is saying, damn it, nigga, y'all kneeling down is costing me money. The NFL, to people don't have the same spirit to want to watch the games no more. Y'all niggas get back up there, as the President Trump said, this son of a bitch. Sorry to have to put it in terms like that, but that's what some black people, they love Trump. I don't understand that one. This dude's called the guy Colin Kaepernick a son of a bitch. I got to pardon the language, but I want to drive home what that fool had said. You understand? And I know black people who actually think that Trump is good. Because Trump don't care about the 0.45% or the 97%. And when you get right down to it, he probably don't care about what they call the elite or the 1%. That's why they playing him like a fool with all this other stuff going on in the world. You understand? So, when somebody says we are phony, but then saying we would focus on 97%, no, you're still being phony if you're only focusing on 97%. Because if you were not being phony, you were focused on the all, which we do, which we know as black people we have a problem once it comes down to the homicide rate. And it's not taking shots, but whoever the white guy or white woman who made this, I'm quite certain it's one of them. The suicide rate among white people is ridiculous. The opioid, all right, drug epidemic in the Midwest is ridiculous. You understand? Cemeteries are being filled regularly because of the death of these people on the drugs. Black people, we were filled with drugs too. But it says that the Most High will pour the cup of fury over the nations. As Israel drunk, so shall the nations drink too. So, while the Most High does what he does, we need to do what we need to do and return back to the Most High, such as not murdering one another. Next slide. How many? This is the list of people who were killed by the police on the males. Sean Bell, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, Sam Dubose, Philindo Castile, Terrence Crutcher, Alton Sterling, Jamal Clark, Jeremy McDowell, Eric Harris, Tamir Rice, who was a child, and a guy named Akai Gurley. How many? One cannot mix the deeds of them who are supposed to be professional, respectful, and considerate to the deeds of known negative gangsters and criminals. See, you're not supposed to be able to equate the deeds of the Bloods and the Crips when they are banging to the deeds of a cop on patrol. That should never be able to be seen in the same light. You get the point? Next slide. How many? Charlena Lyles, Shukri Ali, Deborah Danner, Rakia Boyd, Maya Hall, Miriam Carey, Natasha McKenna, Tanisha Anderson, Yvette Smith, Darnisha Harris, Alicia Thomas, Chantel Davis. All of those 12 sisters are sisters, black women who were killed by the police. This list you see here are black men who were killed by the police. This list you see here, with Shalina Lyles all the way to Chantel Davis, all of them were black women who were killed by the police. And you don't think that we need to come together as a people? It's after hearing that last part from that meme and these two last PowerPoints, if you don't feel we need to come together, when Nia Wilson just got her throat slit like last month inside of California in a public train station, and the situation with the Waffle House matter, and the situation with all these people calling the cops because somebody was selling lemonade, they declaring war on us. You don't think we need to come together? Take your behind somewhere else. Shalom. Giving honor and praise unto the Most High.